Welcome back. You are tuned in to Traders Nation. Please have another original broadcast interview, this time with James Henke. He's book author of the Jim Morrison Scrapbook. You also know him as curator and vice president of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Of course, James, welcome to Traders Nation. How are you today?
I'm good.
Good, good. Listen, you know, what brought you to compile this awesome collection of Jim Morrison notes, lyrics, photos, etc.? I mean, it's absolutely a fantastic collection and book and everything else, audio CD. It really is a bundle.
Well, as you mentioned, I'm the curator here at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and we started working on a Doors exhibit a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I had previously done a similar book on John Lennon, and as we were working on the exhibit, the gentleman who runs the Doors estate and manages the Doors affairs, he said that Jim's family had seen my Lennon book and were really interested in doing one on Jim, and it turned out that Jim's parents had saved like everything, literally from the hospital bill from when Jim was born,
right,
up through like all of his report cards and all sorts of stuff. So they had a immense treasury of stuff, and then I just thought it was a fascinating story. And then they also said that Jim's brother and sister would talk to me, and a lot of people who hadn't talked previously. So it just was a very tantalizing prospect, so I jumped at it.
Yeah, Jim, you would have to agree. I mean, when they came, when the lights had to have been on, I mean, it was with absolute, what a treasure trove of ideas, things like that had to have come together, you know, to compile this book for you. Yeah,
it's you know, first off, well, as you said to me, when we reproduce all these things in there, so there are copies of Jim's report cards that you can pull out. There's the first, in a 1968 Rolling Stone magazine interview, they asked Jim what was the first poem he ever wrote, and he said it was a poem called The Pony Express that he wrote in the 5th grade, and his parents had the manuscript of that, so that's reproduced in the book. And so they just had all these things, and then like I say, and then the Doors management was interested in I talked to the 3 surviving Doors, and I talked to the guy who was the Doors manager during their early heyday and all that. So it was just a fabulous you know, experience to have all this stuff come together. So I had access to do the interviews plus to all this material.
All right. So from the very beginning to all the way to his death, of course, at what defining moment do you feel that Jim was making his way towards his place in rock and roll fame?
Well, I think it's you know, it's interesting because Jim was a very complex guy, and he you know, he did a lot of different things in his life, and you know, he's known for so many different things. I mean, he's the you know, sort of the you know, prototypical sexy lead singer with his black leather pants on and stuff, and he was the bad boy. He was you know, all these different things. He was a poet and all that, and I think he, you know, it was when he was in college at UCLA that he basically he and Ray Manzarek were studying together, and then Ray already had a band with his brothers, and eventually Jim started writing songs, and they decided to form this band, The Doors, and so I think, you know, but then Jim started, you know, I think also when he moved around a lot as a kid because his father was an admiral in the Navy, so he lived in several different places, and part when he was a teenager, he lived outside of San Francisco, and he really got into the beat poets and all that kind of poetry, and I think that's sort of what started leading him down that road, and then near the end of his life, it was the poetry that he was really interested in.
Right, right. Okay, now where do you feel that most of Jim's influences came from? Of course, we talked about poetry, we talked about his travels and being in different places and really being, you know, in touch with certain elements around his surroundings in those places. Where do you feel that most of his influences came?
Well, I think a lot of it did come from his, I mean, he was a voracious reader from a young age and loved reading, and so words were always very important to him, and then I think, you know, as he started getting into music, he also was, again, you know, being influenced by the beat scene in San Francisco, was getting into different types of music, some of the, you know, more psychedelic stuff was going on then, but also, you know, blues and jazz and stuff. And then Ray Manzarek in particular also had a real, you know, he really loved the blues and jazz, and so when they started picking other musicians for the band, Ray really felt it important that they get, you know, people who weren't just, you know, knew how to play rock and roll, but knew how to do a lot of different stuff. And I think that's one of the interesting things is that, you know, I think the Doors' music, and going back and listening to it so much, both for our exhibit and for this book, it's like, it really holds up, and it's, you know, actually quite different from what a lot of other people were doing back in the 60s.
Yeah. Now, Jim, is it fair to say, with the 60s culture, did it make him and break him?
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, you know, he, you know, like I say, he, you know, he had his problems with drinking. He did a lot of drugs and stuff like that, and I think that whole rock and roll lifestyle, you know, he certainly indulged in it, and I think that probably did bring about his, you know, premature death at the age of 27. So I think that was, you know, certainly probably one of the contributors and a thing. But also though Jim was the kind of guy that, who knows, even if he wasn't in rock and roll, he might have been just equally as unpredictable. But I think it's probably certainly that 60s culture and the rock and roll world then probably did take its toll on him.
Right. Now, we did talk about Jim being a poet. Was he more of a poet or an entertainer, or maybe both?
I think both. I mean, he really, he really was sort of the, we always think of Mick Jagger and those guys as being the, sort of the classic lead singer in a rock band, but Jim was really, one of the real prototypes and was just, amazing stage performer, and he, would move around on stage and all that, and he'd tell stories, and he'd, bicker with the audience or talk to them and engage them and stuff, and
sure.
So he was an amazing performer, and then, but he really did love the poetry, and that was one of the things. He had some poetry published prior to his death, and that was one of the things he really wanted at that time, was to really be taken seriously as a poet. And now, as it turns out, there are college classes about Jim Morrison's poetry, so it has worked out. But I think, like I said, I think he just had many different aspects to his character.
Right. All right. Now, let's talk about his uncertainties, because at one point I think there was an absolute certainty. It's when he was on the Ed Sullivan Show. They asked him, they wanted him to change the lyrics to "Come On Baby, Light My Fire," and he didn't. Most expected it, and boy, I tell you what, Sullivan, he was a little upset, wasn't he?
Yeah, Sullivan didn't like that too much, that Jim had just flaunted them and denied his request, and Jim just did it his own way, and I think that was the way Jim was a lot.
That's right. I mean, that was him. I mean, that was Jim Morrison.
Yeah, he was going to do it his way.
He was going to do it his way, and boy, did he ever. All right, now what about today's musicians? Do you see any Morrison influences out there with today's musicians?
Well, I think there is some. I mean, what's interesting to me is that that younger kids keep discovering the Doors, and whether, if I'm talking to someone whether they're 16 or 60, I mean, it seems like there's this whole range of people that love the Doors, and the Doors still sell like 2 million CDs. And a couple of years ago, VH1 did a tribute thing about the Doors, and they got a lot of younger bands, people like Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction and different bands like that, who were all interested in taking part in it. So I think there's, I think their influence, musically, I don't know if there's anyone that sounds exactly like them, but I think certainly, as a lyricist, Jim has still been influential, and I think there are a lot of young bands that keep discovering him out there.
Right. All right. Now, I'm going to go off topic just real quickly. The Hall of Fame, of course, you're curator of. What's the hot item over there? I know they're all great items over there, but what's the hot item? What's everybody come and want to see?
Well, everyone sort of has their different things, because it depends on, like, as it is with rock and roll, everyone likes someone different, and, so someone likes, sure. Obviously our Beatles stuff, people love that. We have a great collection of John Lennon stuff that came from Yoko. We have his Sgt. Pepper uniform. We have his handwritten lyrics to a lot of things. That's some of the stuff I like, are the handwritten lyrics where you see them, where we have a lot of Jim's lyrics too, and where you see they've scratched out stuff, and
sure.
And it's funny because it's sort of a lost art now. Most of the people will write their lyrics on the computer, and so that they make a change, it's just you don't see what that change was. But a lot of the old handwritten stuff, also a lot of the stuff from the early days of these guys, again, sort of similar to what we have with Morrison. We have his report cards and stuff like that.
Right.
We try to get stuff like that. So we have things like with U2, we have the very first U2 T-shirt that they made in a high school art class.
Oh, is that right?
And we also have 2 rejection letters from record companies that said, you're not going to. So it's so stuff like that. I like a lot of that. But then we've got a lot of stage outfits and guitars and everything. So there's a little bit of everything here. So I think no matter who you like, you're probably going to find a lot of stuff that you'll enjoy.
Bad move on the U2 stuff. Listen, U2. Listen real quickly. U2. When they were around in the 1980s, if you didn't know who they were, you didn't know who they were. But if you did, you didn't like them. I was the only one 2 or 3 years before Rolling Stone said band of the 80s. I said, this is the band of the 80s.
All right. Well, I was actually the guy. I was at Rolling Stone before coming here, and I was the big person who championed U2 back.
Did you?
I wrote I was the first American journalist ever to write about them before the first album came out, and then was involved in that band of the 80s thing and all that, so I'm a big U2 fan from get-go.
Nobody knew who they were. If you knew who they were, you didn't like them. I hate them. And they were here in Phoenix, and in Celebrity Theater, it's a little venue. Every seat's a good seat. It's very, very small, and it wasn't even sold out. Unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, that's a treasure, isn't it? Before stuff. Yeah. All right. Now, of course, James, where can we find the Jim Morrison Scrapbook? Barnes & Noble everywhere?
Yeah, pretty much all the big bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Borders, Amazon.com, so most of your major retailers. I think the Best Buy stores that carry books have it, and so it's pretty much, out there of all the big stores. So.
All right, get out there today, get a copy of the Jim Morrison Scrapbook. What a great, fantastic present this would be for anybody's Christmas tree this year, and then some, and then after. All right. James, Henke, thanks for being on Traders Nation here today.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate your time. All right, James Henke on the Jim Morrison Scrapbook. Absolutely fantastic. Get a copy today. Your favorite bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, they'll all have them. Your local bookstore. They're all going to have this, and this thing is absolutely loaded, packed to the hilt with all kinds of great stuff. Handwritten lyrics.
You should open that up. I mean, there's got some really cool stuff in there. There's lyrics, there's report cards, there's pictures. There's some really cool stuff in that book.
It goes on and on. Great pictures. What else is in here? Look at this handwritten stuff. I mean, this is what he was talking about. You don't see where it's scratched out and where you change a word that changed the song forever.
Not only if you're a Jim Morrison fan, but if you're a rock and roll fan, this is a really cool book just to even glance at. A good coffee table book.
That's right. You don't have to be a Morrison fan. All right? You don't have to be just a rock and roll fan. We'll be right back. Stay tuned right here to Traders Nation.